You're listening to Quorum Radio.
And by the way, there's a point where Oswald was walking, is aware that J.D. Tippit's police car, that a police car is approaching him. What happened? Didn't he change direction?
Well, that was my speculation. I'm the first one, as far as I know, that came up with this. And it was all because in reading the eyewitness testimony, prior to my book, Mark Lane and others, would say, speculated that, look, there's these eyewitnesses that say he's walking west. And the Warren Commission said he was walking east. If he's walking west, he'd have to have gone someplace beyond where the shooting occurred and then be coming back. The time would be, so outrageously long that there's no way he could have been killed. That it should exonerate him automatically. Right. So they would, and then they would point out, here's all the witnesses that said he was walking west. Then, of course, the Warren Commission is saying, no, here's the witnesses that say he was walking east. So in looking at the two, it occurred to me one day, I thought, well, what if they're both right?
Yeah, sure.
And so I started looking. I noticed that the witnesses that said he was walking east, which were Helen Markham and Bill Scoggins, who's the cabbie sitting on the corner, neither of them looked toward the police car that's pulling over to the curb until the event starts to happen. In other words, they didn't even look over and notice Oswald until the police car is pulling over. That's what Helen Markham initially said. Now, later she changed her story and that she saw him earlier and so forth. But the initial story is the car, the police car, is what attracted both their attention. And as they followed it over the street, they see it slowing down, and then they see a guy walking the same direction as the car, which is east. But you had, 3 or 4 witnesses earlier that said, no, he was walking west. He was coming from the other direction. And so it occurred to me, well, what if they're both right? What if Oswald is walking west? And I figured out where he would have to be when he spots Tippit's patrol car, and then what distance, if he switched direction right there and ends up getting pulled over, 3 doors down, where would he have been when he switched direction? And I figured out it would have been just before he got to the last house. So Scoggins wouldn't have seen him. Helen Markham wouldn't have noticed him. And it would have only been, he would have switched direction, saw Tippett's approaching patrol car. And that seemed to make some sense to me for a couple of reasons. Yeah, first off, Oswald has been away from the book depository for 45 minutes. Unlike everybody else, he's not listening to the radio or watching TV. He has no idea what's going on. He doesn't know if someone saw him in the window. He doesn't know if his employees have already turned in his name and said he's missing. The police could be out looking for him. See, he doesn't know any of this. So when he sees the patrol car coming, it's what you call consciousness of guilt. His actions betray that he is afraid of something. So he turns and changes direction. And while a lot of people, initially the Warren Commission said that Tippit stopped Oswald because he fit this meager description. And of course, Mark Lane and a lot of others jumped on that saying, oh, come on. The description was so vague, Tippit would have to be stopping everybody in Dallas practically.
But what kind of reaction? There's some speculation that I think the rhetorical questions that maybe need to be asked that are fair, and that is that when Oswald spoke to Tippit, did he give a sarcastic response? Was he asked a question? Did Oswald act just like a normal person, or did he act kind of have a reaction that was a little bit suspicious? Why would he leave the car?
Actually, that occurred to me, and I talked to Murray Jackson. He told me an interesting story that ties into exactly what you're talking about. So back when Murray and J.D. were partners, early 60s, Murray said he was driving down, it turned out to be Beckley, as a matter of fact, in Oak Cliff. J.D.'s in the passenger's side, and he says, as we're driving down Beckley and we pass this one residential house, a brick house on the corner, J.D. says, hey, pull over at the next side street. And Murray didn't know what he had seen or what had happened. He pulls around the corner. He says, J.D. jumps out of the car and goes up to the porch, and there's a kid up on the porch of the first house there. And by the time Murray said I parked the car and then I joined him, he says, J.D.'s already up there talking to the kid, and they ended up arresting the kid. He had a gun on him. And J.D. later told him, I saw the guy make this overt move, kind of duck his hand behind his back or something. And that's cops spot stuff like that, right? So I think that the about face is what caused Tippit to initially pull over. All right. Now, I don't think, and I don't think anybody else believes, based on what happened, that Tippit suspected that Oswald was the presidential assassin. I think he just saw something suspicious. He pulls the car over. Now, here's an interesting thing that occurred to me. Oswald had to have double time to get over there. So to cover 9/10 of a mile in 12 minutes, he'd have to be practically running or certainly briskly walking.
We're talking about a guy who's probably in pretty good shape. I don't know if he kept in good shape or not. He wasn't somebody who was overweight, apparently, at least according to the photos. What's the big deal? I mean, for him to make a 9/10 of a mile, we're not talking about a guy in the 60s.
No. I agree. He certainly could make the distance. My point is that he still had the zipper jacket on, and it was 68 degrees out, which means that he probably was sweating. So when he leans over in the car, maybe his hair is wet, he looks sweaty, and I'm thinking that maybe Tippit sees that and thinks, that's odd. Why wouldn't you just take off your jacket, right? I mean, if you're so hot, you're sweating, why wouldn't you just take off the jacket and carry it over your arm? Why has he got the zipper jacket on? And so I'm thinking maybe something like that, or something that Oswald said, sarcastic or something, perhaps, because it was a 10-second conversation. I think Tippit gets out simply to investigate further. And we know that Domingo Benavides was approaching. There was some traffic coming, and I think Tippit was distracted to get out around the driver's door, get it closed behind him, and then kind of skirt along the side of the car there, so he doesn't get hit by the oncoming traffic. And I think just those couple of moments, he's not looking at what Oswald's doing, and of course Oswald's pulling the pistol. So JD did pull his pistol out. It was underneath his body. No shots were fired, but I think he was probably drawing the gun more as a reflex action.
Sure. How consistent were the descriptions of the suspect, the person seen that shot JD Tippit, and the man found in the Texas State Lee Harvey Oswald? How similar? Was it identical? Were there any discrepancies?
No, they were pretty. It was close enough. I mean, some people were all over the map on the jacket. Some people said it was brown. No, it was light tan. No, it was gray. No, it was white. Some said he had a light-colored shirt and dark slacks, or the reverse. So, but in terms of the eyewitnesses, we know Ted Calloway picked, and he's the used car manager that absconded with Tippit's revolver and chased after Oswald. But when Oswald was fleeing, he was less than a block from the scene, and he's got the gun in a raised pistol position. And Calloway's, he doesn't know if he's a detective or what. He just yells, "Hey, man, what the hell's going on?" And Oswald kind of stopped and shrugged his shoulders and said something Calloway couldn't understand. And then Oswald kind of realizes, I'm drawing attention to myself. So he's kind of briskly walking instead of running, and he's trying to jam that gun into his belt. Well, Calloway observed Oswald pass him about, the width of the road, so 56 feet or so. I think they measured it later. And that night, Calloway goes down, before he saw Oswald on television, goes down and picks him out of a lineup. Absolutely, positively, that's the guy I saw fleeing from the scene. And I'll tell you what, out of all the witnesses I talked to, Ted Calloway was rock solid. I talked to him several times over a 15-year period. He never really varied the story, other than a couple of minor details or things. He was in his 80s when he died, that you would expect over time. But as far as his identification of Oswald and what happened, he never really varied from the story. I thought he was a supremely good witness. I would have convicted Oswald on his testimony alone, although, you want physical evidence, of course, and there was. But just in terms of eyewitnesses, if he was the only eyewitness, it would have been a done deal. And so here's the interesting thing, Bill. There was something like 11 eyewitnesses that either saw the shooting or saw him fleeing the scene. And we know that each one of those people pick up the suspect as he's running. So Calloway sees him run until he gets to the corner, and then you got somebody else. So, I saw him from that corner to the next corner, and so on. So the thing is, a lot of conspiracy folks have tried to shoot down each eyewitness. But the bottom line is, we know they're all seeing the same person. It's not like, a guy materializes and then disappears and he's replaced by a completely different individual. So if any of those 11 along that route are positive that that's the guy, well, then they all saw the same guy.
Right. So, and let me,
And
okay,
I
question.
think Callaway was
Go ahead.
solid on that. So
Dale, what was the distance between the scene of the Officer J.D. Tippit shooting and the shoe store and the Texas Theater?
that's about 6 blocks. So it took Oswald about 20 minutes to go the 6 blocks. And I've heard people say, well, no, wait a minute. It only took him 12 minutes to walk 9/10 of a mile, but then it took him 20 minutes to go 6 blocks. It's like, well, first off, you got, a lot of police cars pouring into the area. So you're not just strolling down the street now. You're slinking from one garbage can to the next, and you're trying to get your way down there. So it makes sense that it would have taken him longer to get there. But he got down to Hardy's shoe store, and as the story goes, people familiar with this story, there's a shoe store manager, Johnny Brewer. He's about 20, and he sees Oswald step into the vestibule, and it's very clear that Oswald's feigning like he's looking at the merchandise because his police sirens are ripping behind him. He kept looking over his shoulder, and the shirt's out because he had ditched the jacket that he was wearing. The shirt's out, the shirt tail's out, and Oswald looks suspicious. And then when he leaves the vestibule and heads up toward the Texas Theater, Brewer steps out on the sidewalk, and he looks up, and the theater's another 100 feet or so up the street. And he can see, Johnny Brewer can see Julia Postal, the ticket taker, come out of her booth, and she's standing, and they're both looking west up Jefferson Boulevard, and Oswald's in between them. And so Brewer sees Oswald slip into the theater behind Julia's back. So he walks up the street. He says, hey, did that guy buy a ticket? And she kind of half expected to see him because out of the corner of her eye, she remembers somebody approaching from that direction. And then she realizes, well, he never passed her, and he could have only gone in the theater. And so she said, well, no, he didn't buy a ticket. So Brewer went in and checked to make sure that he hadn't slipped out one of the exits. And when he was confident that he was still in there, he came back out and told her, better call the police. That might be who they're looking for. Now, by that time, he had heard, of course, on the radio that the president had been shot. And I think they had just announced that it was dead. And then Brewer also said that he had heard a report that there was a shooting of a police officer in Oak Cliff, although they didn't specify where it was. So he just thought, well, maybe it's something to do with this whole thing. And that was at 1:45 when the report went out over the radio of a suspect hiding in the Texas Theater. The cops poured in the front, they poured in the back. Johnny Brewer was up by the stage. He was, they have the exit curtain on either side of the stage. He's kind of standing behind that exit curtain. And when the cops came in the front door, they were yelling to turn up the house lights. The movie's still rolling, but they brought the house lights up a little bit. And when they did, Brewer spotted Oswald in the 5th seat, 3rd row from the back, 5th seat in from the aisle. Saw Oswald stand up, start to exit, go to the aisle to exit. Apparently saw the police pouring in the lobby and sat back down, same row, but the 2nd seat in. So that's where he was arrested. He was sitting in the 2nd seat.